Hey everyone, my name's Madison. Thanks for checking out my channel. Today I'm going to do a review slash discussion of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I'm going to start with a short summary of the book, and then I'm going to share some quotes and some of the main points that I found most interesting and intriguing from this book. Frankl was a Jewish psychologist prior to World War II and after World War II, and in this book he uses his experiences in the concentration camps to discuss his psychological perspective on the meaning of life. The book is broken up into two parts. The first part is primarily his experiences in several different concentration camps, and then the second part is a more technical explanation of his psychological perspective. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and go through some of the points of interest from the book, just from my perspective. I'm not going through everything I tabbed or everything I thought was interesting, just the most salient bits of information. The first thing that I really liked about the book is that he goes through like the psychological stages of a person in a concentration camp, and it was really interesting, particularly because the first stage is this kind of absolutely losing your reason and reacting to it in ways that don't make any sense. Like his first night in the concentration camp, he goes to bed smiling about something, and he kind of wants to explain why that is the case. And one of the things that he says is, I think it was Lessing who once said, "There are things which must cause you to lose your reason, or you have none to lose. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior." And that's from page 19. He uses several examples of inmates first arriving in concentration camps behaving in ways that you wouldn't expect, and I just thought that was really interesting, and also in an odd way comforting, because we all behave oddly in really difficult situations, in abnormal situations, and this is normal. The next thing was also really encouraging. It's this concept that suffering is absolutely universal, and so he describes suffering like a gas, and this is what he says. If a certain gas is pumped into an empty chamber, it will fill the chamber completely and evenly, no matter how big the chamber. Thus, suffering completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative. I find this particularly poignant because, especially in modern culture, we like to compare our suffering in a couple of different ways. You have people who think that their suffering is the be-all, end-all, and that we need to cater to their needs. And then you also have people who are suffering but are afraid of offending other people because they think that their suffering is just not as bad as somebody else's, and so they feel a little bit of shame because of that. And so I think for both perspectives, it's just really interesting to understand that no matter what you're suffering, it hurts the same. And this coming from a man who suffered in a concentration camp. So I just found that perspective refreshing. And it's just one of those things in this book, one of many things in this book that I really feel like modern people need to hear. The next thing is very similar. I feel like modern people need to hear this, is that we have a choice in our attitude. And he says this: "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing: the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Throughout the book, he puts a really high focus on personal responsibility, regardless of circumstances, in all circumstances, which is very different from modern psychological perspectives and modern educational philosophies. And then finally, The whole purpose of the book is to discuss the meaning of life, so I'm going to go ahead and share the 3 things that Frankl says are possible things that give your life meaning. He describes the first one as active work. He says, work gives man the opportunity to realize value in creative works. The second one is a focus on experience or love, and he says that he calls this a passive life, but not in a bad way. He says, a passive life of enjoyment affords him the opportunity to obtain fulfillment in experience, beauty, art, or nature. And then the third one, and the one that we would find the most surprising, but is Viktor Frankl's whole point, is that suffering can also give life meaning and purpose. Suffering well in the face of external forces also gives life meaning. He says, without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. And so in the second part of the book, Viktor Frankl looks at all 3 of those possible meanings for life, and he examines them in more detail and breaks them down. And I thought that was beautiful, that, it's not just one meaning, but we have choice in this. And if you choose to live a life that is focused on work, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you choose to live a life that is focused on experiences, and he equates that to love, because love is fully experiencing another human being, that's great as well. But you can't discount suffering, because suffering is inevitable in life. He says that also gives life meaning, particularly how we face our suffering. So I thought it was a beautiful book, but incredibly difficult to read. I said in a previous video that it took me 2 weeks to read this little book. I could only read a couple of pages at a time, particularly of the first portion when he's describing his experiences in the concentration camps. I would highly recommend it to anybody if you're interested in learning more about one man's perspective on his experience in the concentration camps. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you've read this book, let me know what you think. If you've read other books about people's personal experiences, I'd love to hear your recommendations in the comments below. Hope you all have a great day. Bye.